First of all, a big shout out to Jacob Curian for suggesting this video. Principal engineer is a great role for software engineers. I spent the last 15 years being a principal engineer at 4 different companies: Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Oracle. If you're going to be a principal engineer, and if you're going to do it for a while, chances are good that you too will move between different companies. In that case, you probably want to know which is the best company to be a principal engineer at, and how do they compare to each other. Hi, I'm John Miller, the Deliberate Engineer. I've been working in industry for about 30 years, and I spent 15 of those as a principal engineer at a variety of different companies. I spent about 10 years as a principal engineer at Microsoft, a year and a half as the equivalent at Google, about a year and a half as a principal engineer at Amazon, and finally I spent a little over a year as a principal engineer at Oracle. During my time at these different companies, I got to see how things are done and got a better understanding of what it means to be a principal engineer. I should make a couple notes before we go any further. The first is that this principal level engineer, when I say principal engineer, I'm talking about that role at Microsoft and Amazon. There's a different name for it at Google, staff engineer, and at Oracle, I believe it's a consulting member of technical staff. Even though I'm saying principal engineer, think whatever position is relevant for the company that you're talking about. I should add one more note about the time that I spent working at Oracle. Oracle created a Cloud V2 group some time ago in Seattle based off of a lot of people hired in the Seattle area. It was a very different culture from the rest of Oracle and a very different profile in terms of the type of people hired. In general, people were extremely senior there. When I'm talking about my experience at Oracle, I'm talking about it in the Cloud V2 group. That may be different from Oracle at large. I've made a few other videos about being a principal engineer. The first one is how you go about becoming a principal engineer if you're a senior software engineer, and what the position entails. The second video is about being a principal engineer at Amazon in particular, and the many great things about the role at that company. So you might want to check out one of those videos as well. For the rest of this engineer, we're going to compare being a principal engineer at the different companies across a variety of axes. These axes are, in alphabetical order, autonomy. You can also think of this as your agency. How much control you have over the work that you're doing, which groups and which people you're doing with, and so on. Breadth, the number of different people and different roles that you work with in your role as a principal engineer. Coding, the amount of coding or programming that you do as your primary responsibility for the job. Peering and mentoring, how well set up the company is to give you peers to help you improve in your role, and also mentors to help you learn what it means to succeed as a principal engineer at that company. And finally, prestige, the amount of prestige that the principal engineer gets just for having that role at the company. You can also think of it as the amount of swagger you have in your day-to-day life at the company. Autonomy is how self-directed you are and how much control you have over the type of work you're doing and where you're doing it at the company. The place where I felt the most control over what I was doing was actually Amazon. One of the reasons for this was because of the relative scarcity of principal engineers in the digital division where I worked. I was a principal engineer for approximately 400 other engineers just because there were so few principal engineers to go around. Another thing that gave me a great feeling of agency was the fact that principal engineers are actively organized into a community at Amazon. In other words, you're encouraged to go talk to other principal engineers, go to off-sites with them, and really learn what the other folks are doing. You have this overall community, which I haven't found anywhere else, that really makes it a comfortable place to be a principal engineer. Compare Amazon to Google, Microsoft, and Oracle, and it's a very different feeling. Unlike the relative scarcity of principal engineers at Amazon, at the other companies there were more like 1 in 10 engineers. In other words, you tended to be embedded in a single group, and there were other principal engineers in the other groups around you, so you didn't need to stretch and work with those other teams. In fact, it was a little harder to work with those other teams because they already had all the principal engineer time that they needed. The place where being a principal engineer probably counted for the least was at Oracle. Again, bear in mind that I was in the Cloud V2 group, but when I joined there, rather than being 1 in 10 or 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 in terms of my seniority, I was in the minority. I was one of the less experienced people out of that lab. I had 25 years of experience, and most of the people were senior to me. In terms of breadth, my experience was about the same, which is to say that I had a lot more breadth at Amazon than I did at the other places that I worked. Now at Amazon, I could be working in a variety of different disciplines and a variety of different teams on any given day of the week. It was really nice to see. I could be designing protocols, giving advice on how to set up an internet service. I could be looking at security. I could be digging into the client code on a Kindle, all kinds of different things. The breadth of things that I worked on and the diversity of people that I worked with was really astonishing. Microsoft was probably the second best out of these sets of places in terms of breadth. I was assigned to a particular team, but that team had influence over a lot of other teams, and so we wound up collaborating with people in different organizations or very far away in the same organization. There was a variety of different work to do, so not only the things having to do with the component I was working on, but also data mining, analyzing the way the system as a whole worked, and at one point even digging into stuff all the way up and down the stack. So that was a very nice thing about Microsoft. At Google and Oracle, on the other hand, it really didn't feel like there was a lot of breadth to it. I felt more like a member of just the team I was on. You know, a single engineer, the same as everybody else. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking to do a lot of different things or have impact on a lot of different areas, I would say Google and Oracle are a little harder to accomplish that than Amazon and Microsoft. Coding is a really interesting dimension for principal engineers. There are PEs who get hired just to do coding at any company. On the other hand, a typical PE will code usually with less than 20% of their time. When I was at Amazon, I was there for, let's say, 75 weeks. Out of that, I did maybe 6 or 8 weeks of coding, and that was done in 2 small bursts rather than being spread along the whole time I was there. There could be months that I didn't get to do any coding. And I saw a similar thing at some of the other companies. However, there's 2 companies that really expected their principal engineers to be delivering code as the primary thing they were doing. That was Google and Oracle. So if you're looking for coding as one of the primary things you do as a principal engineer, Google or Oracle out of these 4. Otherwise, you can take a look at Amazon or Microsoft. And if you want to be doing coding, make sure that they're looking for somebody who's going to have their primary contribution be coding before you accept a job at those places as a principal engineer. Peering and mentoring. By this, I mean you having peers and you being mentored, not the mentoring that every principal engineer does for the engineers more junior to themselves. Now, at Amazon, that was probably the best environment for both peering and mentoring. The PE community really made you feel included, gave you a chance to find out how other people were doing, and to do a better job of level setting your contributions. Likewise for mentoring, when I joined as a principal engineer, they assigned 2 more senior principal engineers who followed up on me regularly to make sure that I knew what to do, that I felt like I was being useful, and all kinds of other things. Really a great experience from the perspective of being mentored to grow. The second best place was probably Google. At Google as a staff engineer, I also felt like they made an effort to get you mentored and to help you be more productive. In my case, I was struggling a little bit anyways, so I didn't get the full benefit of the experience, but it was part of the onboarding and the process that they follow there, and so that's good. At Microsoft and at Oracle, not so much. You know, as a principal engineer, you went there and you were just supposed to know what you were going to do. You could meet other people at your level, but because being a principal engineer wasn't such a big deal at those companies, there wasn't any sort of formal community, and really you didn't get any mentoring about how to grow, or at least I didn't get any mentoring, other than talking to my boss and getting the normal mentoring any employee gets from their boss about what they need to do to reach the next level. Finally, prestige or swagger. Again, Amazon is a place where if you want to feel special as an engineer, it makes a lot of sense to go there as a principal engineer. The engineering community on average there is much younger and more junior than it is at the other big tech companies. This means that coming in as a senior engineer or a principal engineer, you really have things to tell people they haven't heard before that they need to hear. So there's a lot to be said for that. And it's built into the process as well, where the people have to talk to principal engineers at a couple times during the product life cycle. For example, at design complete, it's a final principal engineer review. And this makes them understand what you're doing and appreciate the contributions you can make, which again helps you feel like you're really being useful. At Microsoft and Oracle, I really did feel like being a principal engineer is just another job title in the job ladder. Sure, maybe you were, better technically, or you had more experience technically than some of the people who were junior, and so they'd say, wow, I want to be able to do that. But there was no mystique, nothing special about being a principal. It's just one more job title. A place where it probably meant even less than it does at those other companies is Google. Not because they don't value seniority, but because they've hired so many great senior people. They actually have several more technical levels above principal engineer, more than the other companies have. So that when you move from staff engineer to senior staff engineer and then to principal engineer, that's a completely different sort of set of responsibilities than a principal engineer has at any other company. So again, when I say principal engineer at Google, what I really mean is staff engineer that's the same as principal engineer other places. Since they have so many really talented people, they're probably a little less impressed with somebody who's just a staff engineer. So in summary, there's good and bad things about working at all the technical companies. I still think Amazon is probably the best place as a principal engineer to have a really good time and feel the freedom to grow and to be valued. But the fact is, for all these companies, in a principal engineering role, there's a lot of great things about it. You'll get to do marvelous things technically. Your work will be valued. You will earn good money. So it's hard to go wrong with any of them. But if you want to be coding with the majority of your time, maybe you should be tending more towards Oracle or Google. And if you want to be making broader contributions, or you want to have a real agency in terms of what you work on, well, Amazon's probably the best choice for that. Now, I'd like to hear your experience, especially if you're a principal engineer or higher. Do the things that I'm saying, do they match your experience? Do you have experience from other companies where you're a principal engineer that you could contribute so that other people can learn from that? Please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Also, if you found this video useful or entertaining, it'd be great if you could give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing so you can see the other content I produce. Thanks for making it this far, and keep on pushing forward.